Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where lost truths, ancient mysteries, and forbidden history collide. Let's question the past and uncover what was never meant to be found. When we think of angels, we picture humans with white wings. But the oldest descriptions in the Bible tell a different story. They depict terrifying, multi-winged beings covered in eyes or made of living wheels, explaining their first words, "Be not afraid." When the word angel is spoken in the modern world, a remarkably consistent and powerful image springs almost universally to mind. It is a picture of serene and ethereal beauty, a being that is fundamentally human in form, but elevated to a state of perfection. We envision a figure with a gentle, compassionate face, often with long flowing hair, robed in brilliant white garments that symbolize purity and light. And of course, the defining feature, the anatomical element that instantly signifies their otherworldly nature, is a pair of magnificent, feathery white wings arching gracefully from their shoulders. This image is deeply embedded in the collective consciousness of Western culture. It adorns the ceilings of great cathedrals, it is the subject of countless Renaissance masterpieces, and it has been endlessly reproduced in popular culture, from Christmas cards and Hallmark ornaments to Hollywood movies and television shows. This popular image of the angel is one of comfort, protection, and gentle guidance. It is a vision of a benign and beautiful celestial being, a familiar and reassuring presence. Yet, this modern, sanitized, and deeply humanized conception of an angel is almost entirely a product of later artistic and theological traditions. It stands in stark and dramatic contrast to the earliest descriptions found in the ancient Hebrew texts that form the foundation of the Old Testament. To understand the original biblical angels, one must first strip away these centuries of artistic embellishment and return to the source, where the word angel carried a very different meaning and the beings it described were often far from comforting. The primary source of our misunderstanding lies in the evolution of the word itself. In the earliest texts of the Hebrew Bible, the word that we now translate as angel is malach. This Hebrew word does not, in its essence, describe a type of being. It describes a function. The direct translation of malach is simply messenger. The term could be used to refer to a human messenger, a prophet who carries a message from God, or a non-human, celestial being dispatched from the divine realm to perform a specific task. The core identity of a malach was not defined by its appearance or its intrinsic nature, but by its role as an agent of God's will. Their purpose was not to be beautiful or to inspire serene contemplation. It was to be a conduit for divine power, a functionary carrying out the orders of a higher authority. They were emissaries, envoys, and sometimes divine soldiers or executioners. The emphasis was always on the message, not the messenger. This functional understanding is crucial, because it explains the appearance of the first and most common type of angel, described in the biblical narrative, particularly in the book of Genesis. When these celestial messengers interact with the early patriarchs of Israel, they are almost invariably described as appearing in the form of ordinary men. They are so human-like in their appearance, their speech, and their actions that they are often not recognized as angels at all, at least not initially. Their true, otherworldly nature is only revealed when they perform a supernatural act or explicitly state their divine origin. A classic example of this is the story of Abraham and the three visitors at the Oaks of Mamre. The text says that Abraham looked up and saw three men standing by him. He greets them with the normal hospitality of the time, offering them water to wash their feet, a place to rest, and a meal of bread, curd, milk, and veal. He interacts with them as he would with any human travelers who had happened upon his camp. There is absolutely no mention of wings, halos, or brilliant white robes. They are, to all appearances, simply men. It is only as the conversation unfolds, and one of the men, identified as the Lord himself, prophesies that Abraham's elderly wife Sarah will bear a son, that their divine nature becomes clear. The other two men, who are the Malachim or angels, then proceed to the city of Sodom, again appearing as nothing more than human travelers. The story of their arrival in Sodom further reinforces this human-like appearance. When Lot, Abraham's nephew, sees them in the city square, he also greets them as men. He offers them shelter in his home, and the other men of the city, in their wickedness, also perceive them as vulnerable human visitors, demanding that Lot bring them out to be assaulted. The angel's power is only revealed when they strike the men of the city with blindness to protect Lot and his family. In this entire, detailed narrative, the defining characteristic of the angels is their ability to appear as perfectly ordinary human beings, a form of divine camouflage that allows them to move and interact within the human world without immediately revealing their awesome power. The most striking omission from these earliest descriptions is the very feature we now consider to be the most essential characteristic of an angel: the wings. The angels of Genesis are wingless. They walk, they talk, they eat, and they are mistaken for men. The feathery appendages that define our modern image are a much later addition to their iconography. This pattern of the human-like, wingless messenger is consistent throughout the early books of the Old Testament. The angel who wrestles with Jacob at Peniel is described simply as a man. The angel who appears to Gideon to call him to lead the Israelites is at first mistaken for a prophet. The angel who visits the parents of Samson to foretell his birth also appears as a man of God, and it is only when he ascends to heaven in the flames of their sacrifice that they realize they have been in the presence of a divine being. The recurring theme is one of hidden power and delayed recognition. The primary purpose of these angelic visitations is the delivery of a message or the execution of a specific task. Their appearance is secondary to their function, and that appearance is almost always an unassuming human form. The reasons for this initial human-like depiction are likely rooted in the developing theology of early Israelite religion. In a fiercely monotheistic faith, where the worship of a single, transcendent, and incorporeal God was paramount, there was a deep theological resistance to the creation of a complex pantheon of lesser divine beings with their own distinct forms and identities, as was common in the surrounding polytheistic cultures of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan. The neighboring religions were filled with a bewildering array of gods, goddesses, and demigods, often depicted as fantastic hybrid creatures with animal heads, multiple limbs, and, crucially, wings. By describing their own divine messengers as appearing in the form of ordinary men, the early biblical writers were making a powerful theological statement. They were emphasizing the vast and unbridgeable gap between the one true God and all of creation. The angels were not demigods to be worshipped. They were merely servants, their human-like form a sign of their subordinate status. This early, simple, and functional depiction of the Malach as a wingless, human-like messenger stands as the first and most fundamental layer of the biblical angelic tradition. It is a tradition that is far removed from the serene winged figures of later art. These early angels were not figures of gentle comfort. They were mysterious and often unsettling strangers, their power hidden behind a mundane facade. They could bring messages of hope and blessing, as they did for Abraham and Sarah, but they could also be agents of terrifying divine judgment, as they were in the destruction of Sodom. Their appearance was not meant to be reassuring. It was meant to be effective. The modern, popular image of the angel, with its emphasis on beauty and gentleness, has almost completely eclipsed this older, more austere, and arguably more powerful original conception, a conception that valued the function of the messenger far more than the form. It is only by understanding this foundational, human-like depiction that we can fully appreciate the shocking and radical departure that would come later, in the prophetic visions of beings that were anything but human. While the earliest narratives of the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the book of Genesis, present angels as unassuming messengers in human form, a dramatic and terrifying shift in angelic depiction occurs in the later prophetic and poetic books. As the theology of ancient Israel developed and its writers grappled with the profound mystery of God's transcendent nature, a new and far more complex vision of the celestial realm began to emerge. This was the concept of the heavenly court, a divine throne room where God presides not as a solitary monarch, but surrounded by a host of powerful and awe-inspiring celestial beings. These are not the simple Malachim who walk the earth and share meals with patriarchs. These are the higher orders of the angelic hierarchy, beings of pure spirit, fire and light, whose forms are so alien and so overwhelming that they defy easy description. The visions of the prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel, in particular, pull back the curtain on this divine assembly, and what they reveal is not a scene of serene beauty, but a tableau of cosmic terror and wonder. It is in these texts that we encounter the truly biblically accurate angels, the cherubim, the seraphim, and the ophanim creatures so strange and formidable that they would shatter our modern, sanitized image of the gentle winged human. The first of these higher-order beings to consider are the cherubim, cheruvim in Hebrew. In modern popular culture, the word cherub has, through a long and strange process of artistic evolution, come to mean a chubby, infant-like, winged baby, a symbol of innocent and sentimental love often associated with figures like Cupid. The biblical cherubim could not be more different. In the Old Testament, the cherubim are powerful, fearsome, and deeply unsettling guardians of the sacred. Their first appearance is at the very dawn of human history, in the book of Genesis. After Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden, God places cherubim at the entrance, along with the flaming turning sword, to guard the way to the tree of life. Their role here is not to comfort or guide, but to act as formidable divine sentinels, to enforce a boundary between the human and the sacred, and to prevent humanity from regaining access to a state of immortality. They are divine enforcers, creatures of awesome and intimidating power. The most detailed and terrifying description of the cherubim, however, comes from the hallucinatory and powerful vision of the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel, a priest living in exile in Babylon in the 6th century BC, is granted a stunning vision of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. This glory appears as a divine chariot or throne, which is borne aloft by 4 incredible living creatures, the cherubim. Ezekiel's description of these beings is a masterpiece of otherworldly imagery, a desperate attempt to put into human language a sight that is almost beyond human comprehension. He describes each cherub as a bizarre and powerful hybrid. They have the general likeness of a man, but each one has 4 distinct faces. On the front is the face of a man, on the right is the face of a lion, on the left is the face of an ox, and on the back is the face of an eagle. These 4 faces have been interpreted in many ways, often as representing the 4 domains of God's creation: humanity, wild beasts, domesticated animals, and birds, or as symbols of the pinnacle of creation's qualities: wisdom, strength, service, and speed. The anatomy of Ezekiel's cherubim is just as strange as their faces. Each creature has 4 wings. 2 of their wings are spread out above them, touching the wings of the other cherubim to form a canopy. The other 2 wings are used to cover their bodies, a gesture of humility in the presence of the divine. Beneath their wings, they have hands like those of a man, suggesting their capacity to act and to serve. Their legs are described as being straight, and their feet are like the hooves of a calf, gleaming like burnished bronze. The overall impression is not of a beautiful human-like being, but of a powerful composite creature, a being that combines the most formidable aspects of the created world into a single awe-inspiring form. They are not meant to be relatable. They are meant to be a living symbol of the boundless power and majesty of the God they serve. The second order of these celestial attendants, described in a vision by the prophet Isaiah, are the seraphim, the burning ones. Isaiah's vision, which takes place in the temple in Jerusalem, is a direct encounter with God seated on a high and lofty throne. Attending him are the seraphim. Like the cherubim, their appearance is deeply strange and symbolic. Isaiah describes them as each having 6 wings. The use of these wings is highly specific and ritualistic. With 2 wings, they cover their faces, a profound gesture of humility and reverence, as they are not worthy to look directly upon the face of God. With another 2 wings they cover their feet, another symbol of humility and respect. With the final 2 wings they fly, hovering in the air around the divine throne. The primary function of the seraphim in Isaiah's vision is not to act, but to praise. They are the celestial choir, the leaders of the heavenly liturgy, who perpetually cry out to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." Their call is so powerful that it shakes the very foundations of the temple. The name seraphim is derived from the Hebrew word for to burn, and they are often interpreted as being beings of pure light or fire. They are so intensely holy that their very presence is a source of purification. In the vision, one of the seraphim takes a burning coal from the altar with a pair of tongs and touches it to Isaiah's lips, purging him of his sin and making him worthy to speak the word of God. The seraphim, therefore, are not messengers in the traditional sense. They are the innermost circle of the heavenly court, beings of such intense holiness and purity that their sole purpose is to exist in the immediate presence of God, and to endlessly proclaim his glory. They are living flames, embodiments of divine purity and righteous fire. Perhaps the strangest and most profoundly alien of all the beings in the heavenly court are the Ophanim, the wheels, or Galgalim, the spheres, who also appear in Ezekiel's vision of the divine chariot. These are not even biological in form. They are described as living, intelligent, and terrifying pieces of celestial machinery. Ezekiel describes them as moving alongside the 4-faced cherubim. Each cherub has a wheel on the ground beside it. The appearance of these wheels is, in Ezekiel's words, like the gleaming of beryl, a brilliant sea-green gemstone. But the truly bizarre feature is their structure. Their construction was as it were a wheel within a wheel. This has been interpreted in various ways, perhaps as 2 wheels intersecting at a right angle, like a gyroscope, which would allow them to move in any direction forward, backward, left, or right without having to turn. Ezekiel confirms this, stating, "When they moved, they went in any of the 4 directions without veering as they moved." What elevates these Ophanim from mere mechanical objects to terrifying celestial beings is the fact that they are alive and covered in eyes. Ezekiel describes their rims as being full of eyes all around. This transforms them into all-seeing, ever-watchful entities, symbols of God's omniscience and constant vigilance over his creation. The Ophanim are not independent beings. Their movement is perfectly synchronized with the cherubim. The text states, "The spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels." They are part of a single complex living divine apparatus. They are the wheels of God's chariot, the means by which his throne moves through the cosmos. The image is one of a terrifying and glorious piece of divine technology, a fusion of the biological and the mechanical that is utterly alien to our modern separated concepts of these categories. The Ophanim are not angels in the sense of being messengers or attendants. They are a fundamental component of the divine presence itself, living, eye-covered, gyroscopic wheels of terrifying light and power. The collective picture that emerges from these prophetic visions is one of a celestial realm that is not populated by gentle, human-like figures, but by a hierarchy of strange, powerful, and awesome beings whose very forms are a theological statement. The cherubim, the seraphim, and the Ophanim are not meant to be comforting. They are designed to evoke a specific and powerful emotional response in the human witness, a sense of profound awe, reverence, and even terror in the face of the overwhelming, transcendent, and wholly other nature of the divine. They are a visual representation of the immense gulf that separates the mortal from the immortal, the creator from the creation. The bizarre, composite nature of their forms, the multiple faces, the numerous wings, the bodies covered in eyes, the living wheel, a deliberate artistic and theological choice, a way of communicating that the reality of the divine realm is something that cannot be adequately captured or contained by the familiar forms of our earthly experience. These are the true, biblically accurate angels, and their appearance goes a long way to explaining the very first words they so often speak to the terrified humans who witness them. The stark and terrifying descriptions of the higher-order angels, the multi-faced cherubim, the six-winged seraphim, and the eye-covered ophim provide a crucial and often overlooked key to understanding the nature of divine encounters in the Hebrew Bible. These were not gentle, reassuring visitations. They were overwhelming, sensory, and often traumatic confrontations with a reality so profoundly alien that it shattered the very foundations of human perception. In this context, the phrase that so often serves as the opening line for an angelic visitation, "Be not afraid," transforms from a gentle platitude into a necessary and deeply pragmatic act of emergency psychological intervention. It was not a polite greeting. It was a desperate command, an urgent attempt to stabilize a terrified human witness who was on the verge of complete mental and physical collapse. The reason for this overwhelming fear, and the necessity of the subsequent reassurance, lies in the fundamental nature of the encounter itself. A direct, unshielded confrontation with the raw, untamed power of the divine, a power that the human form and mind were simply not built to withstand. The first and most immediate reason for the terror inspired by these angelic beings is the sheer sensory overload of the experience. The prophetic visions of Isaiah and Ezekiel are not described in muted, gentle tones. They are accounts of a full-spectrum assault on the senses. Ezekiel's vision of the divine chariot begins with a stormy wind coming out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. This is not a peaceful scene. It is a violent and chaotic meteorological event, a divine tempest. From the heart of this fiery cloud, the four living creatures, the cherubim, emerge, their appearance described as being like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches. The prophet describes a scene of constant, dazzling motion and brilliant, unbearable light. The sound of the cherubim's wings is described as like the sound of mighty waters, like the thunder of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army. The sound of the ophim, the living wheels, is a deafening roar. This was not a silent or serene encounter. It was an experience of overwhelming sound, blinding light, and terrifying fiery power. Any human being confronted with such a phenomenon would be overcome by a primal and instinctual fear. The modern psychological term for this is awe. But in its original sense, awe was a feeling that contained a significant component of terror. It was the feeling of being in the presence of something immeasurably vast, powerful, and beyond one's control. The human nervous system, when faced with such an overwhelming sensory input, would be pushed to its breaking point. The natural physiological reaction would be one of fight or flight, or more likely in this case, complete and utter paralysis, a state of shock and terror. The prophets who experienced these visions often describe their physical reaction in visceral terms. They fall on their faces, they are struck dumb. They feel as if their very bones are dissolving. Daniel, after his vision of a glorious angelic being, describes his state. "No strength was left in me, my radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground." This is not the gentle swoon of a religious ecstatic. It is the description of a human being in a state of profound physiological shock. The second reason for the overwhelming fear is the fundamentally alien and non-human nature of the beings themselves. As we have seen, the higher-order angels are not depicted as glorified, beautiful humans. Their forms are a deliberate and shocking violation of the natural order as we understand it. They are complex, composite, and often paradoxical beings. The cherubim, with their four different faces, their four wings, and their calf-like hooves, are a fusion of the human and the animal, a creature that defies all biological categorization. The seraphim, with their 6 wings and their fiery essence, are beings of pure, untamed energy. The ophim are perhaps the most alien of all, a form of living, intelligent, seeing machinery. This profound otherness is a key source of the terror they inspire. Human psychology is deeply attuned to recognize familiar patterns, particularly the human form. The uncanny valley is a well-known psychological phenomenon where a figure that is almost, but not quite, human, elicits a powerful feeling of revulsion and fear. The biblical angels occupy a conceptual space far beyond the uncanny valley. They are not just slightly inhuman, they are radically and fundamentally non-human. Their appearance shatters the witness's preconceived notions of what a living, intelligent being can be. This confrontation with a being of such profound and undeniable otherness would be a deeply destabilizing experience, a moment that would call into question the very nature of reality. The fear they inspire is not just the fear of physical harm, it is a deeper existential dread, the fear that comes from realizing that the universe is far stranger and more complex than one had ever imagined, and that humanity is not necessarily the pinnacle of creation. The form of these beings was a deliberate theological statement, designed to convey the transcendent nature of God. They were not meant to be comforting or relatable. They were living symbols of divine attributes that are beyond full human comprehension. God's dominion over all creation, the four faces of the cherubim, His overwhelming holiness and purity, the fiery seraphim, and His omniscience and constant motion, the eye-covered, ever-moving Ophanim. To witness them was to be given a terrifying and humbling glimpse into the sheer, raw power and alien majesty of the divine realm. Their appearance was a form of shock and awe, a way of impressing upon the human witness the immense and unbridgeable gulf that separates the mortal from the divine. It is in this context of sensory overload and existential dread that the angelic greeting, "Be not afraid," becomes not just understandable, but absolutely necessary. The phrase, or its equivalent, appears repeatedly throughout the Bible at the moment of a divine or angelic encounter. When the angel Gabriel appears to Zacharias in the temple to announce the birth of John the Baptist, the text says that Zacharias was terrified, and fear overwhelmed him. Gabriel's first words are, "Do not be afraid, Zacharias." When the same angel appears to the Virgin Mary, she is much perplexed, and the angel's first words are, "Do not be afraid, Mary." When the angels appear to the shepherds to announce the birth of Jesus, the text says that they were filled with great fear, and the angel's immediate response is, "Do not be afraid, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy." This greeting is a form of spiritual and psychological first aid. The angelic messenger, upon its arrival, immediately recognizes the state of profound shock and terror that its very presence has induced in the human witness. Before any message can be delivered, before any communication can take place, the terrified human must be calmed and stabilized. The phrase, "Be not afraid," is a pragmatic and necessary introduction. It serves several crucial functions. First, it is a way for the divine messenger to de-escalate the situation, to lower the witness's overwhelming physiological fear response. It is an assurance that, despite its terrifying appearance, the being has not come to cause harm. Second, it is a way of preparing the witness to receive the important message that is to follow. A person in a state of paralyzing terror is not in a position to listen to, comprehend, and remember a complex divine revelation. The reassurance is a way of clearing the channel of communication, of bringing the witness back from a state of pure, instinctual fear to a state of receptive awareness. It is the celestial equivalent of a paramedic telling a trauma victim to stay calm. "We are here to help you." Third, and perhaps most importantly, the phrase is a theological statement in itself. It is a reassurance that this terrifying vision, this shattering glimpse into the raw power of the divine realm, is not a manifestation of God's wrath, but of His grace. It is a way of saying, yes, the reality of God is awesome and terrifying, far beyond your comprehension, but this power has been sent to you not for destruction, but for a purpose that is ultimately for your benefit. It is a way of bridging the immense gulf between the divine and the human, of contextualizing the terror within a framework of divine purpose and goodwill. The fear inspired by the biblical angels, therefore, was not an incidental or unintended side effect of their appearance. It was an integral and expected part of the divine encounter. It was a natural and appropriate human reaction to a confrontation with the transcendent. The beings of the heavenly court were not designed to be our friends or our peers. They were designed to be living embodiments of a power and a reality that were fundamentally alien to us. The phrase "be not afraid" is the eternal, necessary bridge between these two realities. It is the compassionate and pragmatic recognition that before a mortal can receive a message from the immortal, they must first be reassured that they will survive the encounter. The terror of the vision is what establishes the angel's authority. The reassurance is what allows its message to be heard. The chasm between the terrifying, otherworldly beings of the prophetic visions and the gentle human-like angels of modern popular culture is vast and profound. The journey from Ezekiel's four-faced, hybrid cherubim to the serene white-robed figures of a Hallmark Christmas card is a long and complex one. A story of artistic evolution, theological shifts, and cultural assimilation that has spanned nearly 2 millennia. The popular image of the angel that is so deeply embedded in the Western consciousness today is not a direct inheritance from the earliest biblical texts, but a carefully constructed and highly refined product of art history. The process of this transformation was a gradual one, a slow humanization of the angel, driven by the desire to make the divine more relatable, more beautiful, and above all less terrifying. This evolution, particularly during the late Roman, medieval, and Renaissance periods, effectively erased the strange and awesome beings of the Old Testament, replacing them with a far more comforting, but arguably less powerful vision of the celestial realm. The starting point for this long artistic journey is the earliest period of Jewish and Christian art, in the first few centuries of the Common Era. In this formative period, when artists first began to visually represent scenes from the biblical narrative in the catacombs of Rome, on synagogue mosaics, and in early illuminated manuscripts, their depiction of angels was heavily influenced by the oldest layer of the biblical tradition, the wingless, human-like messengers of the Book of Genesis. The earliest surviving depictions of angels, such as those in the 3rd century catacomb of Priscilla in Rome, show them as young beardless men, dressed in the simple tunics and togas of Roman daily life. In scenes like the Annunciation to Mary or the 3 visitors at Mamre, the angels are visually indistinguishable from the human figures around them. They have no wings, no halos, and no specific angelic attire. Their identity as angels is conveyed not through their appearance, but through the context of the story they are part of. This early artistic tradition was a literal and faithful representation of the oldest biblical texts. It was also a reflection of the same theological caution that had shaped those texts, a desire to avoid the creation of a secondary pantheon of divine beings that could be mistaken for the polytheistic deities of the surrounding pagan world. The first major and transformative addition to the angelic image, the wings, began to appear commonly in Christian art in the 4th and 5th centuries AD. This was a period of immense change for Christianity. Following the conversion of the Emperor Constantine, Christianity went from being a persecuted minority sect to the official state religion of the Roman Empire. This new status brought with it a new confidence and a new set of artistic challenges. As the Church began to build great basilicas and to decorate them with magnificent mosaics, there was a growing need for a clear and instantly recognizable visual language to tell the stories of the faith to a largely illiterate populace. A simple man in a toga was too ambiguous. A new way was needed to visually distinguish a divine messenger from an ordinary human. The solution was to borrow a powerful and universally understood symbol from the very pagan cultures that Christianity was supplanting. The addition of wings was almost certainly influenced by the rich and pervasive artistic traditions of the Greco-Roman world. Winged figures were a common and powerful motif in classical art. The Greek goddess of victory, Nike Victoria in Roman mythology, was always depicted as a beautiful winged woman, a symbol of divine triumph. The messenger of the gods, Hermes, Mercury, was often shown with small wings on his sandals or his helmet, symbolizing his incredible speed. The god of love, Eros, Cupid, was a winged infant. Beyond the major deities, the classical world was filled with a host of other winged supernatural beings, such as genii, the attendant spirits that watched over people and places. These well-established artistic conventions provided a ready-made visual template for representing a being that was divine, celestial, and capable of moving between the earthly and heavenly realms. By adopting the symbol of the wings, Christian artists were able to create an instantly recognizable and powerful image of the angel. It was a brilliant act of cultural syncretism, a process of taking a powerful symbol from a rival tradition and baptizing it with the new Christian meaning. This new winged angel quickly became the standard in Christian iconography. Mosaics from the 5th century Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome show majestic, winged angels participating in Old Testament scenes, a clear anachronism that demonstrates how quickly and completely the new iconography had taken hold. These early winged angels, however, were still far from the gentle figures we imagine today. They were often depicted as powerful, imposing, and even militaristic figures, dressed as Roman officials or imperial bodyguards. They were the formidable soldiers of the heavenly court, the militia coelestis, their wings a symbol not of gentle flight, but of divine power and authority. Throughout the medieval period, the image of the angel continued to evolve, becoming a central feature of Gothic cathedral sculpture and illuminated manuscripts. Artists of this period, particularly in the Byzantine tradition, did sometimes attempt to depict the stranger, more terrifying beings of the prophetic visions. There are rare and fascinating manuscript illuminations that show six-winged seraphim or the bizarre, eye-covered wheels of the Ophanim. However, these were the exception, not the rule. The final and most decisive step in the humanization of the angel came during the Italian Renaissance in the 14th and 15th centuries. The Renaissance was a period of profound cultural and artistic change, marked by a renewed interest in the naturalism and humanism of classical art. Artists like Giotto, Fra Angelico, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo turned away from the stiff, stylized figures of medieval art and sought to depict the human form with a new sense of realism, beauty, and emotional depth. When they turned their genius to the depiction of angels, they brought this new humanistic sensibility with them. The angels of the Renaissance are, above all, beautiful. Their faces are rendered with exquisite sensitivity, their bodies are depicted with anatomical precision, and their expressions convey a range of human emotions: serenity, joy, sorrow, and compassion. Artists like Fra Angelico, a devout friar whose work is celebrated for its spiritual intensity, painted angels of an almost unearthly grace and gentleness, their robes rendered in brilliant blues and golds, their wings a symphony of iridescent color. Leonardo da Vinci's angel in Verrocchio's Baptism of Christ is a figure of such profound androgynous beauty and psychological realism that it reportedly convinced his master to give up painting. Michelangelo's powerful, muscular angels on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel are idealized human forms, expressions of divine power through the lens of perfect human anatomy. This artistic movement effectively completed the transformation of the angel. The terrifying, otherworldly, and non-human beings of the prophetic visions were now almost completely gone from the popular imagination, replaced by what were essentially perfected, idealized human beings with the addition of wings. The emphasis shifted from the terror and awe of the divine encounter to the beauty and grace of the divine messenger. The angel was no longer a being whose very presence could cause a human to fall down in a dead faint. It was now a figure of comfort, a relatable and compassionate guide. This new, humanized angel was an image that was far more accessible and psychologically appealing to the general public. It was an image that sold well, both in the form of church commissions and later, in the mass-produced religious art of the 19th and 20th centuries. This Renaissance-born image has proven to be incredibly durable. It has so completely dominated Western art and culture for the past 500 years that it has effectively overwritten the older, stranger traditions. When modern filmmakers or television producers need to depict an angel, they almost invariably turn to this template. The result is a profound and ironic disconnect. The very reason that the angels in the Bible had to say, "Be not afraid," was because their appearance was, by its very nature, terrifying. The modern angels of our popular culture, however, are beings from whom such a greeting would be entirely redundant. There is nothing frightening about them. They are figures of gentle aesthetic beauty, designed to comfort and reassure us. The vast gap between the angels we imagine and the ones originally described in the earliest biblical texts is, therefore, not just a matter of trivial detail. It is a powerful illustration of how our cultural and artistic imagination can soften, reshape, and ultimately transform even our most powerful and ancient religious symbols. Over the centuries, we have slowly and systematically filed down the sharp, terrifying edges of the divine, remaking the alien and the awesome in our own, more familiar and comforting image. We have exchanged beings of cosmic terror for figures of gentle beauty, a transformation that has made the angel a far more popular and palatable figure, but has also stripped it of much of its original, terrifying, and transcendent power. The evolution of the angelic image is a story of how we, as a culture, have learned to stop being afraid. The gap between the angels we imagine and the ones originally described is vast. It reveals how our cultural imagination can soften and reshape even our most powerful symbols, transforming beings of cosmic terror into figures of gentle comfort. The Bible tells of a foreign prophet named Balaam, so powerful he could speak directly with God. Yet, his story is one of strange contradictions, a talking donkey, and a divine gift that ultimately led to his own downfall and condemnation. In the grand, sweeping narrative of the Old Testament, a story predominantly focused on the trials, triumphs, and tribulations of the nation of Israel, the sudden appearance of Balaam, son of Beor, is a strange and arresting anomaly. He emerges from the historical shadows not as an Israelite prophet in the tradition of Moses or Elijah, but as a foreigner, a renowned seer from the distant land of Pethor on the banks of the Euphrates. Yet, despite his outsider status, he is depicted as a figure of immense spiritual power, a man who communicates directly with Yahweh, the God of Israel, and whose words carry the weight of divine authority. His story, primarily recounted in the Book of Numbers, is not a simple tale of good versus evil, but a complex and deeply ambiguous psychological drama. It begins with a summons born of fear, a powerful king seeking to weaponize the prophet's divine gift, and it immediately establishes the central and tragic conflict of Balaam's character. The profound tension between his clear understanding of the divine will and his own, very human, desire for wealth and worldly honor. The story unfolds at a moment of high tension and existential dread for the kingdoms of the Transjordan. The Israelite people, having escaped from bondage in Egypt and endured 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, have finally arrived at the doorstep of the Promised Land. They are depicted not as a ragtag band of refugees, but as a vast, disciplined, and seemingly unstoppable multitude, a nation forged in the crucible of the desert and guided by a powerful and jealous God. As they camp on the plains of Moab, just across the Jordan River from Jericho, their sheer numbers and their recent, decisive military victories over the Amorite kings Sihon and Og have sent a shockwave of terror through the entire region. The narrative in the Book of Numbers masterfully captures this atmosphere of fear. The text states that Moab was in great dread of the people, because they were so numerous. Moab was overcome with fear of the people of Israel. At the center of this fear is Balak, son of Zippor, the king of Moab. He is a man facing a crisis that he believes he cannot solve through conventional means. From his perspective, the Israelites are an existential threat, a horde that will lick up all that is around us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field. He recognizes that his own army is no match for this divine sea. He needs a different kind of weapon, a supernatural advantage that can level the playing field. His strategy is not to engage in open warfare, but to launch a preemptive spiritual strike. He decides to fight fire with fire. If the Israelites are protected by a powerful deity, then he will find a man who can speak to the gods and turn that power against them. This is what leads him to summon Balaam. The fame of Balaam of Pethor had clearly spread far and wide. He was a professional prophet, a religious specialist whose reputation was built on his perceived ability to manipulate the supernatural realm. In the ancient Near East, the power of a spoken blessing or curse was taken with the utmost seriousness. Words were not just sounds. They were seen as active, potent forces that, once uttered by a person with the proper authority, could shape reality. A blessing could bring fertility, prosperity, and victory, while a curse could bring famine, disease, and defeat. Balaam was renowned as a master of this verbal power. King Balak's assessment of him is a testament to his fame. I know that whomever you bless is blessed, and whomever you curse is cursed. Balaam was, in effect, a spiritual mercenary, a man whose divine gift could be retained for a price. And so, Balak dispatches a high-level delegation of elders from both Moab and the neighboring land of Midian. They travel the long journey to Pethor, a journey of hundreds of miles, carrying with them the fees for divination. Their mission is simple and direct: to hire Balaam to come to Moab and to publicly and formally pronounce a curse upon the nation of Israel. Balak's message to Balaam is one of desperation and flattery. A people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the earth, and they are settled next to me. Come now, curse this people for me, since they are stronger than I. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them from the land. The stage is set for a classic confrontation. A powerful earthly king, driven by fear and political necessity, seeks to co-opt the power of a renowned man of God for his own worldly purposes. It is at this point that the story takes its first, strange and contradictory turn, revealing the complex and ambiguous nature of Balaam's relationship with the divine. As a prophet, Balaam's first step is to consult his spiritual source. He tells the Moabite delegation to wait overnight while he seeks guidance. The text then states with a shocking directness that God came to Balaam. This is a remarkable statement. The God who appears to Balaam is not a local Mesopotamian deity. It is Yahweh, the specific God of Israel. This immediately establishes that Balaam, despite being a foreigner, has a genuine and direct line of communication with the very deity whose chosen people he is being asked to curse. He is not a charlatan or a practitioner of false religion. He is a real prophet who is in contact with the ultimate source of power in this narrative. God's instruction to Balaam is unequivocal and absolute. He says, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." The divine will could not be clearer. The mission is forbidden. The people of Israel are under God's protection, and their blessed status cannot be reversed by a prophetic curse. A truly obedient prophet would have taken this as the final word. He would have dismissed the Moabite elders and refused the commission, regardless of the offered reward. Balaam at first appears to be obedient. The next morning he tells Balak's princes, "Go to your own land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." He correctly communicates God's refusal. However, the story implies a subtle but crucial ambiguity in his refusal. He does not say, "I cannot curse this people, for God has told me they are blessed." He simply says that the Lord has refused to let him go. This leaves the door open for negotiation. When the princes return to King Balak, they report Balaam's refusal, which the king interprets not as a divine prohibition, but as a negotiating tactic. He assumes that Balaam's price is simply higher. This is where the first clear sign of Balaam's internal conflict emerges. King Balak, undeterred, sends a second delegation. This time, it is composed of princes more numerous and more distinguished than the first. They come bearing the promise of even greater riches and honor. Balak's message is now a blank check. "I will surely do you great honor, and whatever you say to me I will do. Come, curse this people for me." Balaam's response to this second offer is deeply revealing. He begins with a pious and seemingly resolute declaration of his integrity. He says, "Although Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the command of the Lord my God, to do less or more." This sounds like the statement of a true and faithful prophet. He appears to be placing his obedience to God above all worldly temptation. But in the very next breath, his resolve wavers. Instead of sending the delegation away immediately, based on the clear and unchanged command he has already received from God, he asks them to stay the night, so that I may know what more the Lord will say to me. This is a pivotal and deeply flawed moment. Why would he need to ask God again? God's will had not changed. The people of Israel were still blessed. Balaam's decision to re-engage with God on this matter reveals the true nature of his internal struggle. His words profess obedience, but his actions betray a heart that is still tempted by the promise of Balak's riches. He is hoping against all reason that God might change his mind, that there might be some loophole, some way for him to both obey God and to profit from the situation. He is attempting to negotiate with the Almighty, a sign of his spiritual corruption. The first contradiction is now clear. Balaam is a man who possesses a genuine divine gift, the ability to hear the voice of God, but he lacks the moral integrity to be a faithful steward of that gift. His heart is divided, torn between the clear knowledge of the divine will and the powerful allure of personal gain and worldly prestige. This internal conflict, this fatal flaw in his character, will set the stage for the strange and terrifying events that are to follow. Having been tempted by King Balak's second, more lucrative offer, the prophet Balaam makes the fateful and flawed decision to consult with God once more, hoping against hope that the divine command might have changed. The response he receives is a masterpiece of divine irony, and a crucial turning point in the narrative. God, in a seeming reversal, gives Balaam permission to go with the Moabite princes, but with a strict and ominous condition. Only what I tell you that shall you do. The text then makes a chilling observation. So Balaam rose in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the officials of Moab. But God's anger was kindled because he was going. This is a profound and deeply unsettling paradox. God has given Balaam permission to go, yet is angry with him for going. This is not a contradiction, but a subtle and sophisticated piece of theological storytelling, revealing a God who is willing to allow a flawed human to follow the desires of his own greedy heart, while simultaneously preparing to teach him a terrifying lesson about the nature of true spiritual sight. This lesson would be delivered not through a grand celestial vision, but through the most humble and unlikely of instruments, his own donkey. The subsequent journey is one of the strangest and most memorable episodes in the entire Old Testament, a bizarre and powerful story of a prophet who is spiritually blind, an animal who can see the divine, and a dramatic confrontation with an angel of the Lord. As Balaam sets out on his journey, full of the prospect of the honor and riches that await him, he is completely unaware that he is walking into a divine ambush. The text states that the angel of the Lord took his stand in the road as his adversary. The first being to perceive the divine threat is not the prophet but his donkey. The text emphasizes this point with deliberate irony. The humble, non-human beast of burden possesses a spiritual perception that her master completely lacks. As the donkey sees the angel with the drawn sword standing in the road, her natural instinct for self-preservation takes over. She turns off the main road and wanders into a field to avoid the terrifying apparition. Balaam's reaction is one of pure, uncomprehending anger. He sees only a disobedient and stubborn animal that is delaying his important and profitable journey. He has no idea that the donkey has just saved his life. He responds with brute force, beating the animal to force her back onto the road. This is the first of three tests. The first moment where the prophet's spiritual blindness is contrasted with the animal's clear sight. The angel of the Lord then repositions himself, creating a second, more difficult test. He moves to a narrow path between two vineyard walls. The donkey, with no field to turn into this time, sees the angel again. Desperate to avoid the threatening figure, she presses herself up against one of the walls, inadvertently crushing Balaam's foot. The pain only serves to intensify Balaam's rage. Once again, he fails to understand the animal's behavior. He perceives her action not as a desperate attempt to save him, but as a malicious and deliberate act of defiance. He beats the donkey again, his frustration and anger blinding him even further to the supernatural reality of the situation. The narrative is building a powerful and damning portrait of the prophet. He is a man who is supposedly a master of the spiritual realm, yet he is completely incapable of interpreting the signs that are right in front of him. He is so focused on his earthly goal that he is oblivious to the heavenly danger. The angel then sets a third and final trap, one from which there is no escape. He stands in a place so narrow that there is no room to turn to the right or to the left. When the donkey sees the angel for the third time, she recognizes that there is no way to go around him. Her only option is to stop completely. She simply lies down in the road, right under Balaam, refusing to move forward into the face of certain death. This is the ultimate act of animal wisdom and self-preservation. For Balaam, however, it is the final straw. His anger boils over. He sees this as the ultimate act of insubordination from his own animal. He begins to beat the donkey mercilessly with his staff. It is at this moment of intense cruelty and spiritual blindness that the story takes its most miraculous and bizarre turn. The text states, "Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey." The animal, which had been silent throughout its ordeal, is suddenly given the power of human speech. She speaks to Balaam, her words a simple, logical, and deeply cutting question. "What have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times?" Balaam, in his rage, is so far gone that he doesn't even seem to register the profound miracle of a talking animal. He answers her as if it were the most normal thing in the world, his reply dripping with anger. "Because you have made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now." The donkey's response is a further appeal to reason, a poignant reminder of her long and faithful service. "Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden all your life to this day? Have I been in the habit of treating you this way?" Balaam, chastened for a moment, is forced to admit, "No." It is only at this point, after the prophet has been verbally rebuked and shamed by his own animal, that God finally intervenes directly. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam. The veil of his spiritual blindness is lifted, and for the first time, he sees what his donkey has been seeing all along, the angel of the Lord standing in the road with his sword drawn. The sight is so terrifying that Balaam immediately bows down, prostrating himself on the ground in fear and submission. The great prophet is finally brought low, forced to see the reality that his humble beast of burden had perceived from the very beginning. The angel's words to Balaam are a powerful and direct condemnation of his behavior. He first rebukes him for his cruelty. "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times?" Then he reveals the truth of the situation, the truth that Balaam had been too blind to see. "I have come out as an adversary because your way is perverse before me. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If she had not turned away from me, surely I would have killed you by now, and let her live." This is a moment of profound and humbling revelation for Balaam. He is made to understand that he owes his life to the very animal he has been beating. The donkey's perceived stubbornness was, in fact, an act of life-saving wisdom. His own prophetic journey, driven by greed, was so perverse, in the eyes of God, that it had brought him to the brink of divine execution. The story of Balaam and his talking donkey is a masterpiece of theological and narrative art. It is a story that operates on multiple levels. On the surface, it is a fantastic and memorable tale, a folk story that has captured the imagination for millennia. But beneath the surface, it is a profound and deeply ironic parable about the nature of spiritual perception. The central irony is the complete reversal of roles. Balaam, the renowned professional seer, the man whose job it is to see into the spiritual realm, is portrayed as being completely blind. His worldly desires, His greed for Balak's gold and his hunger for prestige have so clouded his vision that he is unable to perceive the divine reality that is literally blocking his path. The donkey, on the other hand, a creature that is stereotypically seen as dumb and stubborn, is the one who possesses true spiritual sight. She is not clouded by ambition or greed. She has a simple, instinctual awareness of danger, and in this case, that danger is a divine one. The story is a powerful critique of a certain kind of religious professionalism, a warning that one can possess all the external trappings of a prophet, the fame, the reputation, the ability to speak with God, and still be spiritually blind. True sight, the story suggests, is a matter not of professional status, but of humility and a pure heart. The episode also serves a crucial narrative function in the larger story of Balaam. It is a powerful and terrifying warning from God. God is making it crystal clear to Balaam that although he has allowed him to proceed on this journey, he is on an extremely short leash. The drawn sword of the angel is a potent symbol that Balaam's life is forfeit if he steps out of line. He is being reminded, in the most dramatic way possible, of the absolute and lethal power of the God he is dealing with. This encounter is designed to instill a healthy dose of fear in the prophet, to chasten his greedy heart, and to ensure that when he finally stands before King Balak, he will remember whose words he is truly meant to speak. The journey of the donkey is a brutal and necessary re-education for a prophet who has lost his way. A lesson that burns away his pride and refocuses his attention on the awesome and terrifying power of the divine will. It is a strange and miraculous interlude that sets the stage for the even stranger and more contradictory events that will occur when the spiritually blind prophet finally reaches his destination. After the bizarre and terrifying journey in which his spiritual blindness was exposed and rebuked by his own talking donkey, a chastened and humbled Balaam finally arrives in the land of Moab. He is met with great ceremony by the anxious King Balak, who immediately expresses his frustration at the prophet's initial reluctance. What follows is the central and most paradoxical section of the entire Balaam narrative. It is a series of 3 dramatic episodes in which King Balak, with growing desperation, takes the prophet to 3 different high places, each offering a commanding view of the vast Israelite encampment, and each time commands him to pronounce a curse. Yet, on all 3 occasions, the moment Balaam opens his mouth to speak, the words that emerge are not the curses Balak has paid for, but a torrent of sublime, powerful, and unsolicited blessings. This section of the story presents Balaam at his most ambiguous. On the one hand, he appears to be a true and faithful prophet, a mere vessel for the divine word, incapable of speaking anything other than what God has decreed. On the other hand, the narrative subtly but persistently reminds us of his underlying corrupt motivation, creating a profound and unsettling tension between the beauty of his words and the greed in his heart. The first of these prophetic episodes begins with a great deal of ritual and preparation. King Balak, following Balaam's instructions, builds 7 altars and sacrifices a bull and a ram on each one, a standard practice in the ancient Near East to invoke the favor of the gods. Balak is doing everything by the book, creating the perfect liturgical setting for the powerful curse he is about to unleash. He then takes Balaam to a place called Bamoth Baal, the high places of Baal, a sacred site dedicated to the local Canaanite deity, from which they can see a portion of the Israelite camp. Balaam then instructs the king to wait by the altars while he goes off alone to meet with the Lord. This again reinforces Balaam's status as a genuine prophet. He has a direct, personal channel to the divine. The text states that God met Balaam and put a word in his mouth. Balaam returns to the waiting king and his assembled princes, and he begins to speak. The words that follow are not a curse, but the first of his great oracles, a poem of stunning beauty and power. He begins by stating his origin and the purpose of his summons. From Aram Balak has brought me, from the eastern mountains the king of Moab, saying, "Come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel." But then, in a dramatic reversal, he declares the impossibility of his task. How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? He goes on to speak of the immense and unique multitude of the Israelite people, comparing them to the dust of the earth, and concludes with the blessing on their righteous state. King Balak's reaction is one of shock and outrage. "What have you done to me?" he exclaims. "I brought you to curse my enemies, but now you have done nothing but bless them." Balak has paid for a spiritual weapon, and it has completely backfired, strengthening his enemy instead of weakening him. Balaam's response to the king's anger is a masterpiece of feigned piety and a subtle shifting of blame. He says, "Must I not take care to speak what the Lord puts in my mouth?" He presents himself as a helpless and obedient servant of the divine, a mere mouthpiece who has no control over the words he speaks. He is technically telling the truth. God did put these words in his mouth. However, the reader, who is aware of Balaam's initial greed and the terrifying encounter with the angel, knows that his heart is not as pure as his words suggest. He is fulfilling the letter of God's command, but his presence there, his participation in the pagan sacrifices, and his ongoing engagement with Balak show that his spirit is still very much in the Moabite camp. Undeterred, King Balak decides that the problem is not the prophet, but the location. He operates on a superstitious magical worldview, believing that perhaps the angle of view is wrong, that a different perspective on the Israelite camp might yield a different magical result. He takes Balaam to a second location, the field of Zophim on the top of Mount Pisgah, a place that offers a new vantage point. Once again, they go through the same elaborate ritual. 7 new altars are built, and 7 bulls and 7 rams are sacrificed. Once again, Balaam goes off to meet with the Lord, and once again, God puts a word in his mouth. Balaam returns and delivers his second oracle. This one is even more powerful and explicit in its blessing. It begins with the famous lines, "God is not a human being that he should lie, or a mortal that he should change his mind. Has he promised, and will he not do it? Has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it?" This is a direct and powerful theological statement about the unchanging and faithful nature of the God of Israel. Balaam goes on to declare that he has received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot revoke it. He speaks of a nation that is free from misfortune and iniquity, a people whose king is the Lord himself. He concludes with a powerful image of Israel as a wild ox, a nation of unstoppable strength. This second blessing is even more infuriating for King Balak. His frustration boils over into a desperate plea. Neither curse them at all, nor bless them at all. He is telling Balaam to just be silent, to say nothing if he cannot deliver the curse he was hired for. At this point, the entire enterprise has become a costly and humiliating failure for the king. He has wasted a fortune in sacrifices and has only succeeded in hearing his enemy praised and blessed twice over by the very prophet he had hired to destroy them. Balaam's response is once again a cool and detached assertion of his divine constraint. "Did I not tell you, whatever the Lord says, that I must do?" The tension between the two men is now at its peak. Balak, the desperate earthly king, is powerless against the divine will, and Balaam, the ambiguous prophet, stands between them, speaking words of blessing while his eyes are still, presumably, on the prize. In a final desperate gamble, Balak makes one last attempt. He takes Balaam to a third location, the top of Mount Peor, which overlooks the wasteland where the Israelites are camped. He seems to believe that this desolate view might inspire a more cursed and desolate prophecy. For the third time, the 7 altars are built, and the 7 sacrifices are made. This time, however, there is a subtle but significant shift in Balaam's behavior. The text states that he saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, so he did not go as at other times to look for omens, but set his face toward the wilderness. This is a key moment. Balaam finally seems to accept the futility of his situation. He gives up the pretense of seeking a new message and simply allows the Spirit of God to come upon him. The third oracle that he delivers is the most beautiful and expansive of them all. It is a soaring piece of poetry that describes the beauty and prosperity of the Israelite encampment, comparing their tents to spreading gardens and their tribes to strong aloes planted by the Lord. He speaks of a future king who will be higher than Agag, a traditional enemy king, and of a kingdom that will be exalted. He repeats the powerful imagery of Israel as a lion and a lioness, a nation that will crush its enemies. He concludes with the line that directly echoes God's original promise to Abraham. Blessed is everyone who blesses you, and cursed is everyone who curses you. This final, magnificent blessing is the last straw for King Balak. His anger explodes. He strikes his hands together in a gesture of utter frustration, and dismisses the prophet in a fury. I summoned you to curse my enemies, he rages, and instead you have blessed them these 3 times. Now go home. I said I would bestow great honor on you, but now the Lord has kept you from honor. Balak's final words are a bitter and ironic acknowledgement of the truth. He recognizes that it is Balaam's own Lord, the very source of his prophetic power, who is the obstacle to his receiving his worldly reward. The story could have ended here, with Balaam being sent home in disgrace, a prophet who, despite his own greedy intentions, was ultimately forced to be an instrument of the divine will. It would have been a tidy and morally satisfying conclusion, but the biblical narrative is more complex and psychologically astute than that. In a final 4th oracle, which Balaam delivers unbidden before he departs, he utters a prophecy that is not about the immediate present, but the distant future. He speaks of a star that shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter that shall rise out of Israel. A prophecy that has been interpreted in both Jewish and Christian tradition as a reference to a future messianic king, King David or the Messiah himself. This final prophecy seems to confirm his status as a true seer, a man who has been granted a genuine vision of the distant future. This series of 3 or 4 blessings presents Balaam at his most profoundly ambiguous. On the surface, his actions appear to be flawless. He consistently and eloquently speaks the word of God, even in the face of immense pressure and the promise of great reward from a powerful king. He is in these moments a perfect prophetic vessel. His words are some of the most beautiful and theologically significant poems in the entire book of Numbers. He seems to be a model of obedience, a foreigner who has been co-opted by the God of Israel to be a witness to his power and his faithfulness to his chosen people. However, the narrative is carefully constructed to constantly remind the reader of the underlying corruption of his heart. The story of the talking donkey has already revealed his spiritual blindness and his perverse motivations. His repeated willingness to go with Balak to new locations, to participate in pagan sacrifices on pagan high places, and to try again and again to find a way to curse Israel, all speak to his true desires. He is not a willing and joyful servant of God. He is a reluctant and constrained one. He speaks the words of blessing not because his heart is aligned with God's will, but because he is, quite literally, afraid for his life. The memory of the angel with the drawn sword is undoubtedly fresh in his mind. He is a man trapped between his own greed and his fear of a God whose power he knows to be absolute. This makes him a far more complex and interesting character than a simple righteous prophet. He is a portrait of a person with the genuine spiritual gift who is constantly at war with his own character flaws. The beauty of his prophecies is a testament to the power of God, who can use even a flawed and unwilling instrument to achieve his own purposes. The story is a powerful statement that the validity of a divine message is not dependent on the moral purity of the messenger. God's word is powerful and true, even when it is spoken by a greedy and spiritually compromised prophet. The 3 blessings on the high places of Moab are therefore a strange and unsettling spectacle. The sublime words of God, spoken by the mouth of a man whose heart still longs for the wages of unrighteousness. This profound contradiction sets the stage for his final, tragic, and treacherous act. The story of Balaam, as told in the book of Numbers chapters 22 through 24, could have concluded with his dismissal by the furious King Balak. Had the narrative ended there, Balaam would have remained a profoundly ambiguous but ultimately harmless figure. A greedy prophet whose corrupt intentions were thwarted by the overwhelming power of God, forcing him to speak blessings instead of curses. He would have been a flawed but ultimately constrained instrument of the divine will, sent home without his reward but also without having caused any real harm to the people of Israel. The biblical narrative, however, is not a simple morality tale, and it does not grant Balaam such an easy exit. The story continues, and in the subsequent chapters of Numbers and in later commentaries throughout the rest of the Bible, a much darker and more sinister picture of Balaam's final actions and ultimate legacy emerges. It is in this aftermath that his true character is fully revealed. Unable to curse Israel directly with his words, Balaam, in a final treacherous act, devises a more insidious plan to bring about their downfall, a strategy that would cement his reputation not as a gifted but flawed seer, but as a symbol of profound corruption and a cautionary tale for all future generations. The main narrative of Balaam's oracles in Numbers 24 ends with him departing to his own place. This seems to suggest that he simply went home. However, a later passage in Numbers, chapter 31, reveals what happened next. This chapter describes an Israelite war of retribution against the Midianites, who were allies of the Moabites. After the battle, the text lists the enemy kings who were killed, and then adds a crucial and chilling detail. They also killed Balaam son of Beor with the sword. The great prophet, the man who spoke with God, dies an ignominious death in a battle, slain as an enemy of the very people he had been forced to bless. This brief notice of his death raises an immediate question. If he had gone home, what was he doing back in the land of Midian, siding with Israel's enemies? The answer is provided in the same chapter. As the Israelite soldiers return with the spoils of war, and the captive Midianite women, Moses is furious with them. He rebukes his commanders, saying, "Have you allowed all the women to live?" These were the very ones who, on Balaam's advice, caused the Israelites to act treacherously against the Lord in the affair of Peor, so that the plague came among the congregation of the Lord. This is a stunning and damning revelation. The narrative, which had previously been silent on Balaam's final actions, now explicitly states that he was the mastermind behind one of the most disastrous episodes of apostasy in Israel's wilderness journey. This affair of Peor, described in Numbers 25, occurred shortly after Balaam's departure. The Israelite men began to engage in sexual immorality with the Moabite and Midianite women. These women then invited the men to participate in the sacrifices and worship of their gods, particularly Baal of Peor. This act of mass idolatry and sexual immorality was a profound violation of Israel's covenant with Yahweh, and it provoked a furious divine response. A devastating plague broke out in the Israelite camp, killing 24,000 people. The plague was only stopped after Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron the priest, in an act of zealous righteousness, publicly executed an Israelite man and his Midianite partner. Now in chapter 31, the narrative explicitly connects this entire catastrophic event back to Balaam. He was the one who gave Balak and the Midianites the counsel. The nature of this counsel reveals the depth of Balaam's corruption. He had been a brilliant legalist. He had understood the letter of God's command, "You shall not curse this people," and had obeyed it to the letter, because he was afraid of the consequences. But his heart was still set on receiving Balak's reward, and so he devised a diabolical workaround. If he, as an external agent, could not curse Israel, then he would advise Balak on how to make the Israelites curse themselves. He used his intimate knowledge of Israel's God and their covenant relationship to devise a plan to destroy them from within. He knew that the one thing that could break God's blessing and protection over Israel was their own sin and disobedience. His advice was a form of sophisticated spiritual and psychological warfare, used the allure of the Midianite women to seduce the Israelite men, not just into sexual sin, but into the far greater sin of idolatry. By causing them to break their covenant with Yahweh, they would bring a divine curse and judgment down upon their own heads. It was a treacherous and insidious plan, and it worked with devastating effect. Balaam had finally earned his fee from Balak, not by the words of his mouth, but by the poison of his counsel. This act of betrayal is what sealed his fate and led to his death at the hands of the Israelite army. He died not as a revered prophet, but as a paid enemy agent who had instigated a catastrophic attack on God's people. This dark final chapter of Balaam's life story completely reframes his character and his legacy. The beautiful and powerful prophecies he spoke are forever tainted by the knowledge of his ultimate treachery. Throughout the rest of the Bible, both in the Old and New Testaments, he is never remembered for the blessings he was forced to speak. He is consistently and universally held up as a negative archetype, a powerful and damning symbol of a religious figure who prostitutes his divine gift for the sake of personal profit. His name becomes a byword for corruption, greed, and the act of leading the faithful into sin. In the New Testament, his condemnation is even more explicit. In the second epistle of Peter, the author warns against false teachers, describing them as those who have left the straight road and have wandered off to follow the way of Balaam son of Beor, who loved the wages of wickedness. Here, his primary sin is identified as greed, the love of money that led him to try to circumvent the will of God. In the Epistle of Jude, Balaam is mentioned again in a similar context, warning against ungodly people who have rushed for profit into Balaam's error. Finally, in the book of Revelation, the risen Christ delivers a message to the church in Pergamum, condemning them for tolerating those who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the Israelites, so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality. In the New Testament, Balaam is not just a flawed historical figure. He is an enduring symbol of a specific type of spiritual danger, the danger of the corrupt religious teacher, who uses their position and their knowledge to lead God's people astray for their own personal gain. The story of Balaam, from its strange and contradictory beginning to its treacherous and ignominious end, is therefore a complex and deeply unsettling portrait of a man at war with himself. He is a character of profound dualities. He is a foreigner who has a more direct and personal relationship with the God of Israel than most Israelites. He is a prophet who speaks some of the most sublime and accurate prophecies in the Old Testament, yet his heart is filled with greed. He is a man who is granted a moment of divine sight, yet is shown to be more spiritually blind than his own donkey. He is a man who is physically constrained by God to speak only blessings, yet who uses his cunning to devise a devastatingly effective curse. His story is a timeless and powerful cautionary tale. It is a reminder that the possession of a genuine spiritual gift, whether it be the ability to prophesy, to teach, or to lead, is no guarantee of a righteous character. The story of Balaam serves as a permanent and unsettling warning within the biblical tradition that the most dangerous enemies are often not the overt, external foes, but the corrupted insiders who use the language of faith to serve the ends of greed and destruction. The story of Balaam is a complex portrait of a man caught between divine inspiration and human greed. It serves as a timeless and unsettling reminder that possessing a gift from God does not guarantee the wisdom to use it correctly. Thanks for exploring with Ancient Relics Keeper. Stay curious, question everything, and remember the truth is often buried deeper than we think.